Imagine kneeling in a grave while the priest sprinkles earth on your head, not because you're dead, but because your neighbors say you are. The choir hums. A shroud grazes your cheek. Someone presses a wooden clapper into your palm and tells you to ring it so the living can flee. This wasn't a metaphor, it was policy, a funeral of the living. Exiled to the city's edge, you would eat apart, pray apart, and sleep listening for dogs that didn't fear bells. Think this is mercy? Think again. Tonight, we open the coffin lid on charity that felt like punishment. Let's go. They didn't just diagnose you, they buried you, formally. The rite survives in medieval sources under names like the separation of the leper, where the newly declared outcast was led to an open grave, given a shroud, and symbolically committed to the earth before being sent to live beyond the town's edge. The words were chilling. Not farewell, but you are dead to the world. It made legal sense too. In many places, once you were ritually dead, inheritance rules and civic rights shifted around you like dirt filling a pit. The logic was theological and practical. Purge impurity. Redirect fear. But here's the twist. The priest also exhorted the crowd to give alms and not abuse the person. Mercy and exclusion in one breath. Imagine a modern hospital discharge that comes with a funeral and a relocation order. Think it couldn't happen? It did, often. And the costume of exile, sackcloth, cross, and that clapper, announced it with every step and sound. Next, we'll see how a single church council rewired medieval cities to make room for the living dead. In 1179, the Third Lateran Council handed down a deceptively gentle command. Arrange proper accommodation for lepers. Those few words hardened into practice. New lazar houses and chapels sprouted outside walls, by gates and along roads, close enough for alms, far enough for comfort. Call it medieval zoning law with a halo. The council's canon didn't rant about demons. It standardized space, and space is power. Once isolation was codified, town plans bent around it. Picture a ring of little churches with herb gardens and dormers, their bells echoing across fields, an entire architecture of controlled compassion. Modern planning boasts green belts. The Middle Ages built gray belts of fear and pity. Yet even here the record complicates the cliché. Some houses looked more like devotional communities than prisons, with rules about mass, food, silence, and gardens. Still, the policy line held. Lepers had their own places, their own cemeteries, their own doors, just not yours. The map of mercy was a boundary. Now, step inside one house and meet its sound, the clapper that made you heard and kept you apart. No medieval sound said, "Do not approach," like the dry snap of a leper's clapper. Two paddles slapped together, a cricket made of wood. Museums still keep them, simple, portable, impossible to ignore. Authorities required the instrument not merely to warn, but also to beg. One click could mean unclean, the next, alms for bread. Mercy was performance art, choreographed at arm's length. Here's the twist historians note. The clapper wasn't always just a scare device. In some places, it functioned as a sanctioned way to communicate need, the voice of the wretched. But dignity. Try ringing for your supper. Imagine having to shake a noisemaker every time you approached a water source, a doorway, or a friend's barn. Now, compare it with modern, silent alarms. QR codes for donations, geo-fenced alerts, contactless tapping, tech changes, distance stays. And that wood? It outlived lives. Copies survive from English leper hospitals into the 1600s, reminding us that the soundscape of segregation lasted centuries. Keep the rhythm in your ears as we enter a house rule book that bound bodies and souls hour by hour. Open a medieval house statute and you won't find a rant. You'll find a schedule. Rise, wash, Mass if able. Silence during offices. Eat plainly. Obey the master. Pray for the founder's soul. The Ilford Hospital near London spelled it out in the 1300s. Attend divine service unless bodily infirmity prevents it. Keep silence. Practice devotion. This wasn't a dungeon. It was a cloistered machine of care and order. There were cottages around a chapel, herb plots for medicine, and laundry twice a week where funds allowed. Food aimed at cleanliness and wholesomeness, not feasting. Think broth, bread, garden greens. Here's the irony that bites. By day, the ritual of the living funeral said you were dead in law. By night, the statutes said you were a fully alive soul under obedience, expected to sing, work a garden, and give thanks. Mercy was real. So was control. And outside the hedge, markets and parishes quietly learned to outsource compassion to the edge of town. Hospitals of St. Mary Magdalene, St. Nicholas, St. Margaret. Names of saints masking the geography of fear. Next, we press on the tenderest nerve. Sex, marriage, and the crowded bed theologians tried to regulate. Medieval canon lawyers argued about everything, including this. Does leprosy break a marriage? The blunt answer from the heavyweights was no. A leper could marry. A marriage did not dissolve because disease appeared. Theologians even said a spouse owed the marriage debt to a leprous partner. Sexual relations remained a right, though cohabitation could be limited to protect the healthy. Feel the dissonance. One right says, dead to the world. One court says, still a husband, still a wife. In practice, local statutes and customs often pushed couples apart, replacing beds with visits, affection with curated distance. Imagine a front door that opens for duty and closes for fear. Today, we talk about harm reduction. They were doing a medieval version. Awkward, moralized, and inconsistent. A spouse could live away and still be bound in conscience. A leper could be in a house with single-sex dormers while still technically married. It's intimacy by paperwork. The goal wasn't romance. It was containment without tearing up the sacrament. But paper rules crack under panic. One summer would prove it. In 1321, fear of contagion exploded into a national witch hunt, with water as the supposed weapon. Southern France heard a rumor. Lepers were poisoning wells. Not just sickness, conspiracy. At torture rung confessions, and the lie metastasized. Jews financed it, Muslims schemed it. Powders would infect rivers. Municipal councils ordered arrests. Royal edicts followed. Bonfires bloomed. It's the classic script of scapegoating. A public health panic welded to old prejudices, with property seizures sweetening the zeal. Many historians see the episode as legal theater that taught Europe how to persecute minorities for centuries. The macabre detail? Chronicles quoted lepers describing bags of powder to be dumped in fountains. Water, the one thing even the outcast needed from town, became a trap. Compare it with modern misinformation spirals about vaccines or biolabs. Different medium, same velocity. Within a year, some officials were already backpedaling. Later, papal documents recognized innocence and called for restitution. But the damage was done. Trust emptied faster than the wells. After 1321, city gates felt heavier, and bells sounded more like alarms than petitions. We return now from panic to policy, to the church council that earlier codified separation, and to the quieter daily grind of life at the edge. How did those houses actually work, hour by hungry hour? Archaeology and records flesh out the routine. Picture a chapel with a sloping floor, for washing after Mass. Cottages huddled around a hall. A master's pantry stocked with barley and salted fish. Clothes laundered twice a week when money allowed. Herb beds smelling of mint and rue. The point wasn't luxury, it was cleanliness and predictability, two things that pity and fear could agree on. Work was therapy before the word existed. Gardening, tending livestock, weaving tasks for those who could. Families visited, inmates went home occasionally. Houses traded at the gate, often on major roads to catch almsgivers. The result? A miniature economy of outcasts sustained the larger city's conscience. These spaces weren't merely walls, they were machines, pious, practical, and public-facing. If you think of a modern hospice, add a toll booth and a chapel choir. That's a leprosarium at its best. At its worst, underfunded, corrupt, or panicked, it became a holding pen with prayer books. Either way, it bent streets and habits. Next, the legal fiction that made the funeral of the living bite, how being dead in law could flip the table on property, courts, and testimony, declare someone dead to the world, and legal consequences cascade. In many jurisdictions, lepers lost standing in court, became unreliable witnesses, or faced restrictions on holding or transmitting property. Even where full civil death wasn't enforced, suspicion shadowed signatures. Guardians or custodians stepped in. Disputes multiplied. Think about what that means for a smallholder with a boundary ditch and 3 daughters. Overnight, the farm's future could slide to cousins, monasteries, or creditors, who all suddenly became very interested in diagnosis. It isn't hard to imagine how convenient a living funeral could be for rivals. Yet the same framework carved out protections. Houses got endowments, inmates got alms rights. Some communities elected their own wardens. Law both crushed and cushioned. The paradox was by design. Keep the impure out of the civic bloodstream while insisting they remained souls in the body of Christ. Dead for the market, alive for the mass. If that split feels modern, it is think of people rendered invisible by bureaucratic categories yet expected to vote, pray, or perform. Now meet the order that made leprosy a uniform and a banner. The Knights of St. Lazarus. In the Crusader states, a hospitaller order grew around a leper hospital and took the name of Lazarus, the beggar of the gospel. Over time, and hotly debated in detail, the brothers took on a military tint, with sources placing them in armed roles by the 1200s. Picture it. A disease that made you ring a clapper in Europe and a cross that put you on a horse in the East. Whatever the exact chronology of swords and rules, the core is striking. A community where those marked for exclusion elsewhere found organized purpose and status. The paradox holds again. The label that expels can also unite. And back in Europe, houses linked to St. Lazarus bore the green cross as the sign of structured care. It wasn't victory over stigma. It was an alternative to it. Yet, banners don't erase bells. Even Lazarites had to navigate the same fear circuits when they returned west. Our next stop returns to the parish level, where one priest, one rite, and one crowd could change a life by the sound of earth on cloth. Imagine the chapel doors opening for you the last time as a parishioner. The rite began not in a court, but in a churchyard, at an open grave with the burial office. 3 shovels of soil fell onto your hood or bare head. The formula, recorded in later summaries, framed it as conversion, dead to the world, alive to God. Then a costume, sackcloth robe marked out, a cross to carry, a clapper or bell, an alms box. The congregation gave money. The priest warned against violence, and you were led away, to an edge marked in some versions by planting your cross in new soil. It is chilling and humane at once, and that's the point. The community could hold 2 ideas. Help the afflicted, keep the afflicted out. If you're hearing the modern refrain, thoughts and prayers, plus not in my backyard, that's because the chord progression hasn't changed in 8 centuries. Only the instruments have. The rite turned diagnosis into theater, and theater into policy. And the curtain never fully closed. At Easter, some places relaxed entry rules. letting the living dead return for days of grace. Then the bell rang again. Now, let's step into numbers and dirt. How many houses, how they looked, where they sat. England alone built at least 320 leper hospitals between the late 11th century and 1350. The earliest known, St. Mary Magdalene at Winchester, shows the pattern. Chapel, hall, cells, gardens, everything a soul needed to pray and a body needed to endure. Scattered along roads and beyond walls, these houses became landmarks on pilgrim maps and municipal rolls. Some survived the Black Death only to be dissolved by Tudor policy. Others shifted into almshouses as leprosy waned. But for 2 centuries they shaped skylines and habits. The very act of walking out a gate taught a lesson. Charity is outside. And for a child, the first geography lesson might have been pointing to a chapel on a hill and being told, "That's where the lepers are." Numbers don't measure the smell of herbs or the slam of a clapper, but they do show scale, sorry. Fear builds institutions. Institutions then outlive the fear. Next, we contrast statute with practice, because the further you read into the records, the less simple total exclusion becomes. Here's the part textbooks flatten. Many lepers were not locked away for life. Some entered houses voluntarily. Some left to visit family. Some begged at markets by license. Some, documented in rules, attended parish mass when illness allowed. Even the clapper could be a tool for connection, the permitted voice to ask for bread. A council canon might demand distance, but the baker still had a cousin in the house, and affection ignores statutes. Meanwhile, jurists argued in the other direction, upholding marriage rights, adjudicating disputes, fending off landlords fishing in troubled waters. So the map blurs. Exclusion by design. Inclusion by practice. Call it mercy by workaround. If you want a modern echo, look at needle exchanges, housing vouchers, street medicine, systems that acknowledge people where they are while drawing firm, sometimes arbitrary lines. The medievals were already there, stitching boundaries with prayer. In our final act, we step back from streets and statutes to the meaning of mercy itself, and the price the outcast paid so the healthy could feel holy. Let's put the clapper down and look back at the grave. We began with a living person kneeling in a pit, dirt falling like seconds on a clock. That moment, call it theater, call it law, summed up the medieval collision between compassion and control. The rite of separation declared you dead to the world, yet begged the community to feed you. One ritual exiled you. The same ritual demanded kindness. That paradox became a city plan. Councils set rules, towns built houses, roads bent around little chapels, bells stitched soundscapes of warning and petition. Mercy developed an address. It was at the edge of town. Inside those edges, life went on. Statutes from places like Ilford show people expected to pray, eat, wash, and work gardens. Archaeology at Winchester suggests sloping chapel floors for washing after Mass, cottages arranged to be clean, functional, and devotional at once. When funds existed, clothes were laundered twice a week. When they didn't, piety had to fight poverty as well as disease. The houses were not hells, nor were they heavens. They were disciplined, often devout, sometimes corrupt, always visible machines for managing fear. The proof is on the map and in the rule books. Project Gutenberg +1. Then there is the law's razor. Being buried alive didn't just feel like a curse, it operated as one. In some places, the newly separated lost rights to testify or to control property. Guardians crept in, inheritances slid sideways. The living funeral rearranged families as effectively as a will, and yet, medieval jurists also protected lepers in unexpected ways. Canon law increasingly refused to void marriages because of disease. A leper could marry. A marriage that later met leprosy did not vanish. Cohabitation might be limited. Conjugal rights remained. In a single paragraph of Thomas Aquinas, you can hear the tightrope. Safeguard the sacrament, reduce risk, honor bodies, awkwardly. Compassion and containment as case law. New advent, but the raw nerve is panic. In 1321, fear of contamination detonated into mass persecution. Authorities tortured lepers, seized property, and burned victims after extracting stories about poisoned wells and conspiracies financed by Jews and Muslims. Later, some officials admitted the truth. The accusations were fever dreams. Still, the scars stayed. If you want to understand how later Europeans learned to criminalize whole groups with procedural polish, study the edicts and interrogations from that summer. It's a playbook written in water and fire Wikipedia +1. So what was mercy? Not a feeling. A system. It built cottages and chapels and ordered meals. It stamped bells and wrote statutes. It carved out their own cemeteries and their own doors and their own masters. It told the healthy that they were kind, and told the afflicted where to stand when accepting kindness. In Crusader lands, the Order of St. Lazarus even turned stigma into structure, organizing care and, if we trust some sources, combat roles. Where one world rang a clapper, another wore a cross. Institutions can both cradle and brand. Wikipedia. Now, the uncomfortable mirror. Modern cities still draw their compassion at the edges. Shelters under highway ramps, clinics tucked behind warehouses, refugee housing not in my backyard. We praise harm reduction, but debate where to put it. We create badges that open doors and badges that bar them. Swap the sackcloth for paperwork, the clapper for a phone app, the chapel for a waiting room, and the choreography is hauntingly familiar. The medievals didn't invent hypocrisy. They engineered a version of proximity, near enough to serve, far enough to forget, that we still practice. What, then, does the funeral of the living teach? First, that fear loves a liturgy. Give it robes, words, and a processional, and it will feel righteous while it segregates. Second, that charity without imagination creates beautiful buildings that still keep people outside. Third, that a law is a scalpel and a cudgel. It can keep a marriage whole while cutting a home in two. It can direct alms while diverting inheritance. You think this is ancient? Count the zoning meetings where compassion loses by a vote of 3-2. Here's the real twist. The right also preserved a truth moderns need. The leper was alive to God. Not metaphorically, liturgically. Even at its harshest, the system insisted on the person's soul. That insistence shames our sleek, efficient indifference. The challenge now is to keep the soul and drop the ditch. So I'll leave you with a question. When our neighbors ring, in whatever voice today's clapper takes, do we hear a warning to step back or a summons to step closer? If this shook you, subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments which detail hit hardest, the grave, the bell, or the well. And if you're grateful you weren't born to a wooden clapper, hit like. We've got more dark history next week.